Bonjour, Etienne.
Uh, Hello, can you hear me? I'm
We
still
we can hear you. We can see your green
working
screen and all.
on the technical. Yeah, it doesn't look as nice, but had to use a second camera because we're
That's
live
all
streaming
good.
from a live stream.
Well,
And
thank you for joining us.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so just give me one quick minute as I do a quick little intro and hello. So everybody's not just surprised.
Sure.
We're not just going to drop this on them like the Emergency Act. We'll give some, we'll give people a little bit
Yeah.
of notice so they're prepared. Wow, that was a great morning, everybody. So the commissioner was full of truth, nothing but the truth, and help him God. Clearly, this man is nothing but integrity through and through. It's just seeping out of him. In the way he talks, the way he takes his time, the way he organizes his thoughts and makes sure that it's all working right. It's incredible. What time are they breaking, Wayne? Now. They're breaking now for 1 hour. So it'll be for 1 hour for lunch. The convoy will likely attest this. Yeah, for sure. So I really thought we'd do it. Yeah, no, totally. We all had the rumblings that the EA might be coming down. There were some rumors about it, but just like open source information, rumors are rumors. But truly, the people who had the legal minds and knew what the EA meant never saw it coming. They said there's no way. Like that is so far down the field of out of bounds that there's no way they're going to do that. We were wrong. We were wrong. And we're finding that out in this inquiry, just how unnecessary it truly was. There's nothing but testimony today about how unnecessary it was. Well, that along with the OPS's disorganization and inability to reach out for help when they needed it. There seems to be a lot of pride in that police force services. But yeah, there you go. We're getting a ton of testimony. So much integrity. You got it, Sandy. Absolutely. It's just oozing. And you can now see, where the OPP itself, we've had, I think, four witnesses from the OPP now. One of them was slightly political. You can tell with some of his answers. Purdy was trying to dance a political line as well. I don't think he lied. He just didn't give full answers, and he skirted a lot and backpedaled a lot. But other than that, the integrity has been very high with the OPP all the way down the chain. So I'm not surprised to hear what we're hearing today. It's wonderful testimony. And for everybody that's going to watch at the end of this stream today, Connie, I'm doing this for you. So if you're watching it, I'll do a full recap so that the last little bit there is more in detail about the first morning, because I would love to spend this time here with Etienne. Etienne, I've been trying to practice your name, so I hope I'm close enough now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also feel a little bit bad that we didn't have enough time on the last chat because we had so many heads on the screen, because I just met you, I think, the day before. You reached out to me. You had a wonderful email. I love when those emails come in. I usually pull my wife aside and say, hey, read this with me, because they're pretty cool emails. So thank you for that. And I think you identified what it is I'm looking for in my path forward and why I'm putting my energies here. This is a full-time unpaid job, and then some. So there has to be more than just a desire to be a politician. There needs to be a passion behind it. And I think you recognize that. And I also recognize the same passion in you, because here you are putting your time and energy forward to help democracy in a way you think is necessary. And I think you have a lot of support around that. So what I wanted to do is I reached out to you and I said, hey, let's get you on for the full hour, basically by yourself. And let's let Canada know what it is you're working on so that we can get that out there. So everybody, this is Etienne, wonderful name. And he's here to talk about Save Democracy, a group that he's passionate about. And yeah, it's all yours there, Etienne.
Thank you. Yeah. So savingdemocracy.ca is the website, and it's a new initiative to strengthen democracy through various activities, long-form analysis, civil debates, and investigative journalism. And we have a specific task to estimate the health of Canada's democracy with respect to our fundamental freedoms. And then as a second step, actually try to pass new legislation to strengthen or bulletproof, add checks and balances to our democratic process, because we of course have checks and balances, but with all this COVID measures, this is shown to us unambiguously that they are insufficient. And this might sound ambitious to try to pass legislation, but I still think it's worth a shot, and we can debate those ideas. Of course, Jason is running for an independent MP, and I mean we can talk about that later. There's so much to talk about, because it also seems ambitious, and maybe like, is there really a chance? So, and that's a common thing. People like, do you think really is there a chance? Again, if you look at the track record, like we talked about during our last panel discussion, if we've been this abysmal in our progress with all the different groups and the lawyers, does it really make sense to keep going that route? And does it make sense to be an independent? Like, how much impact can you have? But either way, we need to have as many different approaches and really try to debate the merits of these different tactics and throw everything we have at the kitchen sink. So briefly about my background before I jump into this new infographic. My background is in science. So I was trained in social psychology, but while doing my PhD, I actually discovered serious methodological problems with the way we were trained to do research, and then started pushing for higher rigor in our research, more transparency, more replication, against the advice of my professors, because that's just the type of person I am. I'm a principled person, and even if it means sacrificing my professional career, I just have to fight for principles. And I not only finished my PhD, but then I went on to do a postdoc where I actually was calling out professors for being insufficiently transparent. And then I joined what's considered the open science movement, because it's a global movement to try to make science more transparent, more rigorous. And we had small victories, but really the take-home message was, most of these academics are not actually, like, they say they're interested in transparency, but they're not, most of them are not willing to walk the walk. And I actually discovered corruption in the open science movement, almost like controlled opposition. And then I decided, well, I'll just go on my own, and then I'll submit this evidence to the government. And then I was shocked that the government and the funding agencies also didn't seem concerned about these low standards. And that's what led me to democracy, because a democracy is supposed to be based on science, the rule of law, but science is one of the main institutions, right, that underlies a democracy, right? We're supposed to base our public policy decisions on credible scientific evidence that is then implemented. And it's not sufficient. I don't want to get into the follow of the science, but follow the science is a red flag, because science can only give you the facts, and that's only if it's well done. So we have low standards, but then you need to go beyond the facts. Like, to actually implement public policy, you need to combine facts with values, right? Values of, like, how much is a life worth? How much is an elderly, frail life worth compared to children? And some of these can be uncomfortable discussions, but it's the job of politicians to really show that they've done all the cost-benefit analyses with their values that are built upon the scientific facts, right? So you should never say we're just following the science, because science doesn't tell you what is the most what's the most optimal for your given values for a specific population of people. And so that's why when COVID started, I had skepticism immediately from the beginning, with that background of knowing that, okay, the global academic system is fatally broken at all levels: the researchers, the journals, the universities, the funding agencies, the publishers. And I mean, I have a 10-hour podcast simply on that. So if you type in Saving Science, the Saving Science show, you can get 10 hours of details on this. And again, I'm not just a crank. I'm a published author in psychology, meta-science. You can go to Google Scholar. I've published in some of the world's most prestigious journals, including Science itself. And so with COVID, I realized and even in 2015, I'm working on a book called Dangerous Deceptions that tells my story of blowing the whistle in science, and then the strange pushback I received, because we thought, we'll just raise transparency standards, we'll raise replication standards, and we can be on our way. But then we discovered these problems are systemic, even in medical science. And then, as I mentioned, we realized that most of these professors are not interested in actually implementing new transparency standards. We even did the world's first transparency audits in science, which resulted in people slinging mud at me, calling me racist, and all kinds of nastiness. And I warned in that book, because people were like, "Oh, you're an idealist. Nothing is perfect. Science can't be perfect." And I warned people, when academic science standards are so low, it can allow rogue governments or any rogue or any company, pharmaceutical companies, it allows them to weaponize low quality science to serve their agenda rather than the agenda of citizens, right? But now that I realized, well, now it kind of makes more sense that the funding agencies are not interested in fixing science in the way they give money, because maybe they are benefiting from broken science, and so they're weaponizing broken science to further their agenda. And so that's the background of how I got to saving science, because I realized, saving democracy, because if we don't have democracy, well, then there's no need for science. There's no need for real science if the tyrants can just decide what their interests are. Because again, that was the Enlightenment period, right? We can base our decisions on science and carefully constructed public policies rather than just religion or authority or authoritarianism. And then I started digging into the health of our democracy, and maybe this is a good time I'll try to share my screen.
Well, if you don't mind. So Sandy,
go ahead.
So Sandy agrees with you here. So yes, it's science is a foundation to making good decisions, and you're right. So when you're doing policy and you need politicians involved, we rely upon heavily the information given to us, and if that information is flawed, skewed, or otherwise, it could be nothing but problems for us. And you nailed it. Science isn't a certainty. Science is a process. It's something that we're always working on. And if you exclude it as one of the pillars to democracy, you're absolutely right. You're going to have to go to sages or the grand master of wisdom who's just going to tell you what everything is. And that is absolutely totalitarianism. That's exactly one of their pillars, is to just give you the information. Okay, so let me add your screen to this.
Okay,
here we go.
There it is.
Yeah, no, it's on my end. I had to push a button for you.
Perfect.
Oh, now we got me too. Too many of me. I'll get everybody to run away.
So this is the main thing I wanted to present, because of course there's probably thousands of scandals and developments that are an assault on our fundamental freedoms. But I was trying to organize it because we have limited resources, right? We got to focus. What are the key stories to focus on, right? As an initiative for anyone, right? And so I decided to go to the Constitution. The Constitution, of course, has like 34 sections, I believe, and I was trying to distill it. What are the most fundamental freedoms that give life, that make life worth living, right? And I broke it down to these 6 categories, starting with individual human rights. And I'm trying to organize them so they actually make sense too. The most important, in my opinion, would be bodily autonomy and having health, right? Because without bodily autonomy and health, then you can't enjoy the other freedoms, like freedom of assembly, right?
Can we get you to zoom in on that one?
Yeah. So This is the idea of starting with bodily autonomy. So once you have your own bodily autonomy, you have your own health and your own decisions, then you can use your body to speak your mind, right? So you can speak your mind with the freedom of expression and speech. And then you have democratic rights that allow you to participate if you want. And that's the luxury of democracy. You could ignore politics if you want, right? But you can also participate in it. And then, of course, once you have those individual human rights, well, then you can have what I'm calling interpersonal or interspatial human rights, which is then decide I'm going to use my healthy voice and I'm going to associate with other groups. Freedom of association in private, or freedom of assembly in public, right? So I can use my healthy body and my voice, and I can speak my mind, right? And then I can travel the world, travel the provinces, travel Canada, freedom of mobility. And then finally, life, liberty, and security, which is kind of miscellaneous, but it's what allows you to pursue gainful living, pursue gainful employment, and maybe even self-defense.
And whether it was intentional or not, you laid out the 3 that were stolen from us during this convoy, during the last 2 years. Those were the 3 that were stolen from us.
Well, and actually, I would argue that
all of them.
So this is what, again, like you can pick and choose. Say, okay, there's a crisis over here, crisis over there, but now I'm not going to go through all of them. But these are 17 developments.
Okay, so mine's still up, everybody.
Oh, I think you cut out a little bit. Is to use, again, and this is mixing metaphors, but think about your own body. Are you still there? Oh, okay. If you had a bruised knee and a scraped forehead, right? You could say, well, you've got some injuries, but they're not life-threatening, right? So your body's still overall healthy, even though you have a few isolated injuries. In this case, I would argue.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Go ahead.
These are vital organs, right? Because again, these are just the 6 most basic, in my opinion, right? So it's different than just saying, well, there's some minor problems with democracy over there, but they're isolated, right? This arguably is there's problems with our 6 most basic fundamental freedoms that make life worth living. And there's a systemic health problem because our vital organs are injured, right? Like our lungs, our heart, our brain, right? And so it's a lot more concerning than just, oh, there's a few problems, because there's always been problems with democracy, right? I mean, there's no system that's perfect. But I would argue that this is the first time where it's become more obvious that our vital democratic organs are injured, that therefore make it more concerning. Does that make sense? Because each development in of themselves are concerning, but when you combine them in this chart, it's even more concerning. It should be more concerning to you. And then adding insult to injury, it would appear these authoritarian flavored developments are actually happening in virtually all other Western democracies.
You're right.
Which makes it more concerning. And I have European correspondents, which we'll have on my show, and they will give us their perspectives, right? So it's important to keep in mind and to interpret these developments in the broader geopolitical context, because it's not just Canada that's facing these problems, right? And
you're
so
right.
I can maybe give you a chance, and then I can give more details. Go ahead.
No, sorry. What I was going to say is you're right, because a lot of times we just focus in on individual rights that we've lost, for example, gun rights or mobility. And what we don't do enough of is zoom out and see the totalitarian, the total of what's going on here. And then zoom out even further to the global level.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like there's a lot of coordination or maybe coincidence about a whole bunch of countries doing very similar things. Attacking their version of these rights in similar ways. So yeah, I see what you're saying, and I don't know how much we can go into all that, but when other countries start acting very similar, you start wondering if there's an agenda, right?
Yeah, and yeah, maybe just very quickly, and a lot of it relates to the Emergencies Act. So the key stories are serious problems with COVID vaccine safety and efficacy evidence, mandatory COVID vaccination for employment and general participation in society, because this would even be a problem in the event that the COVID vaccine was actually safe and effective. It would still be a medical ethics violation to make it mandatory, right? And then insufficient justification for mandatory masking, freezing of bank accounts, freedom of Freedom Convoy donors, insufficient justifications for invoking Emergencies Act, which of course is what's being covered.
Which we're seeing right now, yeah.
Insufficient, invalid justifications for the new hate speech legislation and new social media regulation legislation. Trudeau labeling COVID unvaccinated individuals as anti-science, who are often racist and misogynistic.
Yeah, we like that one.
Trudeau unwilling to listen to 6 to 7 million Canadians concerned about and or against COVID mandates. I think you've covered that too, right? In our panel. So there's the double standard. Why is that double standard? A democracy, again, it's when I was rereading this, you have the right to participate in the democratic process, to have one's voice heard in Parliament, right? That's a right, but somehow Trudeau is not willing to meet Freedom Convoy organizers or protesters, but he is willing to meet Black Lives Matter, right? So that's a big mystery that seems incompatible with our normal democratic process. And then insufficient justifications for prohibiting rail air travel to COVID unvaccinated individuals, insufficient justifications for prohibiting travel. This was before the vaccines. There was this heartbreaking case of like a woman in PI women from Nova Scotia trying to go to PI to care for her dying mother, was rejected, sued the government, and then lost.
Wow.
And then finally, insufficient justifications for closures during lockdowns, insufficient explanations for ongoing and worsening problems with the healthcare, despite increasing investments. So that's also another big mystery that maybe makes a little bit more sense once you start, again, taking a broader look. And so we want to look into that, because it appears like there's decreasing quality of care despite increasing investments. And then the emergency room wait times seem to be getting out of control. And they've always been bad, but it seems to be getting worse than bad, right? Even some small hospitals that you may have seen now even shutting down emergency room altogether for like overnight or the entire weekend, which is unprecedented, right?
Well, I can tell you that Drayton Valley closed down their maternal ward because they don't have an anesthesiologist. So all births in our area have to go to Edmonton now.
Right. And so we would need to look at that, because they're claiming, well, there's shortages, staff shortages. Mm-hmm. Well, there are many reasons for staff shortages, and maybe some of them you're responsible for, right? By making the COVID vaccine mandates, that led to a lot of people quitting or being laid off, and then just a general toxic environment. There's all these reports that, keep to yourself. So some brave nurses are trying to speak up, and they're either told, to hush, or they'll face disciplinary action. So you can't just blame staff shortages when arguably they are responsible for their staff shortages.
Right. And one of the challenges that we're working with in Alberta is because the federal government has put down 2 harsh immigration rules when it comes to experts and people with PhDs. It's difficult to get it to be translated to Canadian, and we have a lot of capable, competent people here not practicing because of the restrictions on the immigration level. So this goes right back to the federal government as well. By choking the professionals that are available to immigrate, it's also shrinking the talent pool available to us. So in Alberta, we're fighting hard to recognize some nurses and fast track them into the services.
Yeah, and that's encouraging. And I think it's called also credential, like trying to equate, medical credentials from different countries and trying to harmonize them so that they don't have to, retrain and take longer to meet the Canadian standard. Because I definitely agree there needs to be a standard. But if they are comparable, they should just be fast tracked.
That's the argument. That's the argument, because they are comparable. Certain countries have great programs. We just don't recognize them.
Right. And then the last one, insufficient justifications for the new gun control legislation. and then these sneaky order in councils, which I didn't even knew existed until like 3 months ago. So that shows you, and I would assume a lot of Canadians, maybe I would assume most Canadians don't even know these loopholes and these back doors where they can pass. And they just passed another one, I think, more recently about the handguns, right? And order in councils completely avoid the parliamentary debate stage in the House Commons and the Senate. And again, these are 17. So this is just 17 developments out of like maybe thousands, but I argue these are among the most crucial that should be followed, and we should try to get to the bottom of it. And that's the other thing the last thing to point out is by the label active means that we're doing an active investigation where we both have current action and the next action. I can even zoom in a bit more. So for example, I submitted my evidence to Health Canada and about 30 MPs last fall, September 2021, for a safety signal with the COVID vaccine based on the government's own data, which was corroborated by other independent peers. So it's not peer reviewed, but it's peer reviewed in the informal sense. I have several PhD collaborators who review my work and even send it to friends, smart, careful engineers. I mean, you don't need to be officially a scientist to be able to look through data and check and recheck and double check from different perspectives and see if it's consistent with other evidence of other people who lack conflict of interest. And basically got no response, even email Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Health Ontario, basically got no response, or these template messages of like, copy and paste. Oh, here's reasons that you can trust the vaccines, and it's just copy and pasted from somewhere else. And none of the MPs, a few MPs responded with a template message, but none actually looked into it substantively. And so the next action would be to submit ethics violation complaints against the Public Health Agency of Canada and all contacted MPs who did not investigate, and then submit the evidence to other. So we only sent it to about 30 because it's very time intensive, but like this evidence should be submitted to all other MPs, provincial politicians, even municipal, and then the same for the mandatory COVID vaccination. I think there's a case to be made, and we're working with lawyers, but there's definitely a case to be made that there's been some kind of ethics violation against Trudeau and the Public Health Agency for violating the Nuremberg Code. I mean, the Nuremberg Code, you can't just violate that and pretend there's no problem. This is highly egregious, and again, by trying to organize it this way helps to show the urgency. And I don't want to be alarmist. I mean, I'm against alarmist and sensationalizing news, of course. I want to pursue the truth, and the truth can be dark. But to be in the best position of trying to figure out how can we make progress on these problems, the idea was to organize them into these basic categories. And again, these are the basic fundamental freedoms that make life enjoyable. And as we saw during COVID, I mean, that was, unprecedentedly dark how quickly we lost these freedoms, and we weren't even able or supposed to visit grandma or go to Christmas or, all these very precious moments with our family and friends were just gone, so yeah, that's the presentation or the
cool. That's awesome. So we got lots to talk about there. So some of the movements you did is you sent it to some MPs, but you're using the government that has the problem. So the current government is the one that has the problem. So we're submitting stuff to them, ethics violations, etc. And of course, you could probably presume you aren't the only highly credentialed person also doing that. There's probably lots of other people silently even doing it. So clearly they're going to be receiving a bunch and template response, a whole whack of them. So what do you think that this government, if aware, would be capable of actually doing? Do you think that an ethics violation would raise it to the point where we got Henshaw, or we have some other health leaders answering questions like they would do in the States. They have Fauci sitting in front of a senator talking. Would we do something like that? Could it get to that point? Also, one thing to realize is we didn't really have a clear distinction on the human rights around medical. So it's tough to say during that period of time how much of a violation it was, because it wasn't in there. It wasn't one of the protected classes. But in Alberta, we're looking to add that one to the Alberta Human Rights Code, so that going forward, it's definitely a clear violation.
Which one specifically? Sorry.
The human rights code for Alberta. So we have our own. So within the next 3 months, Danielle Smith has committed to amending the Human Rights Code of Alberta to include medical. So you have the right to medical privacy. Because it's not listed there, it wasn't protecting anybody during employment issues during those phases.
But it is in the criminal code. So informed consent, pretty sure is in the criminal code.
Sure. Yeah, no. And I think what you're going at is going to be a challenge, because I'm going to play the devil's advocate there.
No, actually, I agree. But it was just to clarify what you were saying.
Yeah,
I do think that these routes are going to lead nowhere, but you still need to start from the start. But
sure.
Yeah,
because the criminal code one will be difficult, because everybody that got the vax, even though if it was under duress, voluntarily took it. On that level, when it comes to the criminal
code.
It's
not, but it's not technically. Like, once you're under duress or coercion, it's no longer voluntary informed consent.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue too much about that, because it has to certainly be tested, and I think we're going to have a Supreme Court decision around that, and I think you're going to be happy with that decision ultimately. But the challenge with it is, until that's been done, it's debatable. So it's going to be a challenge. I don't disagree. And also, when you brought up the Nuremberg Code, that, of course, there's a whole whack of stuff. Even the way they treated the protesters, there's a whole whack of violations of international law. What do we do? There isn't, like, do civilians bring it up to an international court? Do we even trust international court? Do we trust UN? Is there even an avenue there outside of our country? And would it even be beneficial to try and pursue one of those? For example, the human rights violations on the protesters alone, that itself could stand as an international court matter. The way they responded to that, and that might actually happen after the inquiry is complete, and we'll see what comes out. But is that a realistic thing that Canadians can maybe look forward to, or even attempt, or is that just we're just going to the global leader now, and they're just going to quash us there at that level, anyways?
Yeah, no, I don't think the chances are very high, because of the track record of, like I mentioned, like there's hundreds, if not thousands, of other independent groups, credentialed people, highly lawyered up people and groups with almost basically no progress. But of course, you can also try, with the more independent crowd, or like the opposition. And this I also tried and was disappointed. So, for example, Randy Hillier, I actually reached out to Randy Hillier, and he did call me. Like, he did respond to some emails. We had a 45-minute call last fall, but it seemed a bit half-hearted. He said, so at the time, the context was he had written a letter to the RCMP commissioner about these suspicious young person deaths following vaccination, of suspicious deaths, because again, young people do spontaneously die, like young as in, like, teenagers and 20-year-olds, they do spontaneously die, but very, very at a very low rate. So he penned a pretty good letter and submitted it to the RCMP commissioner, that they started an investigation. So I reached out to him for more details, because I thought his letter could be improved in his analysis. So I wanted to do a more quantitative analysis of what he was asserting. And again, he did grant me a 45-minute call, which was very generous. But then throughout the call, it seemed to be some red flags as to his commitment to his letter. Because again, his letter, it's pretty compelling, but yet he didn't seem to want to invest any more time, like finding the details I was asking for. Then he promised, well, I can create another blog post that ask for those details instead of hiring an administrative assistant to go through the thousands of emails that he gets apparently. But then he never did it, so he never followed up on that, and I followed up, and now he's kind of he's kind of retired, right? So he there was all that scandal about he formed his own provincial party instead of joining forces with the new blue party, and then he'd end up not running, right? And so now he's no longer able to help us, right? But the point of mentioning that is that, yeah, indeed, we have to try these alternative paths, because, yeah, we know that the establishment politicians are most likely not going to be able to respond for mysterious reasons. It seems like they are constrained by other constraints that are unbeknownst to us.
I don't think it's mysterious at all. I think that's party platform and whip that you're running into there.
Yeah, and then. Yeah, and we don't. I mean, maybe we do have time, but the World Economic Forum, and even it's not really that hard to find evidence, and even yesterday I found even more dark developments where they were, even in the early 2000s. If you look at the legislation they were passing in Canada, they were like in even 2004 they started passing legislation that was basically copied and pasted from the World Health Organization. They were developing these harmonized international health regulation to deal with potential pandemics. And they have this Quarantine Act. And it's very well documented that they are basically copy and pasting from this international. And again, that on the surface, it sounds reasonable, right? I mean, okay, maybe there are better ways, because if it is a pandemic, then you would want some coordination, that different countries are meeting actual higher standards for how to deal with this, right? But then the concern is losing individual sovereignty, right? Because kind of like the provinces, health is a provincial matter. So, we need to make sure that the people that have power over us is as local as possible, right? So then you get that accountability and that feedback, right? But if Canada is signing and into law these quarantine acts that are maybe serving other people's interests, like that's dangerous, and we lose individual sovereignty as a country, right, to deal with our own issues, even though it could be a global issue.
So we had a whistleblower from the federal government join us last week or so. So if you haven't seen that video, check it out. It's only an hour, and she's on the science side of things. She's a very credentialed.
Yeah, I did you. Part of it.
So one of the challenge that we were talking about was exactly what you just said there. So global science coming down the pipe, and we were basically rubber stamping it. We weren't doing much with it. We weren't even looking into it, validating, qualifying in any way what we were getting. And she, of course, brought that up as a major concern. So we were chatting about, well, how do we have our current government do more of that at the same time that we're not happy with what they did do? So how do we kind of change the system and trust it again? And one of the things we spoke about briefly was setting up more of a research and analysis type of groups, whether it was provincial and they all work together, or whether it was a national one with representation from all the provincials, some sort of body that would allow, it could be Canada's science, whatever we end up calling it. But the whole purpose of it is to go ahead and use global sources and receive global guidance and local guidance and research from our universities and other universities. But the purpose of it is to go through the information and do our own homework on a national level. The more that we copy the homework of others, the more we're going to be surprised to find out that there's other things involved in it that we didn't even think about because we didn't do our own homework. And I think it would be a tough thing. Like if we had enough support on an MP level to go ahead and I think we would have to do two stages. First, we would have to do an inquiry and investigation of what did happen. What kind of information did we have? What kind of analysis were we doing? Did we go through the data? So we first have to see what was the attempt we did at this point. through an inquiry, we'll find out enough information to likely then recommend and develop our own way of handling it much, much better. Through this inquiry, we're seeing kind of that process right now. So this is around what the government can and should and would have been able to do. And then going forward, some more recommendations and possibly a lot of constraints, but we'll see. So I think, you know, there's no magic bullet, because we still want science. We want it global. We can't handle all research, so it's really good to coordinate. But like you pointed out at the beginning of this, there's so much corruption and hiding of information. And so for that reason and that reason alone, we should have our own body that's going through and doing our own homework.
Yeah, and they need to meet very high standards,
Very, very high
both
standards.
in terms of transparency standards and conflict of interest, like ethics standards and transparency, because the people in this panel would have to be established to be sufficiently independent and sufficiently transparent with any conflict of interest. And
So
of course, in Ontario, we had the Ontario Science Table. I forget where the parallel in Alberta, but these people were not they were not independent enough, and they had conflicts of interest. I mean, they were getting paid, and of course their work needs to be paid, but there was concern that there was disproportionate compensation for being on the Ontario Science Table when these people were already professors, making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they were all establishment professors. And again, it might be difficult for some people to understand, right? Because if you don't know all the problems going on in the university system, right, it might be hard to understand. But again, in science, you need viewpoint diversity. And even if someone sounds like a crackpot, science is not about vote counting. Sometimes there is consensus in science, but that's not the main criteria for whether you should believe something or not. It's more about the extent to which a piece of work has withstood scrutiny. Right. And you want to scrutinize a piece of work, like ruthlessly scrutinize it, but you can only achieve that if you have sufficient details. And that's why we've been calling for higher transparency standards for decades. But beyond that, also the conflict of interest, financial independence, and so, yeah, that kind of independent, firewalled organization. The other thing I learned is that the Public Health Agency was created out of thin air, more or less, 2004, as a way to, kind of guide, like, kind of federalism, to have, some harmonized approach to health problems. But again, is there sufficient independence between the Public Health Agency and the chief medical officer and the ruling party, right? And COVID has showed us that it's clearly not sufficient, right? Because it seems like they cannot disagree with, the mainstream narrative, right? That it's just not possible. And so the value of this group is only valuable to the extent that they can make their actual independent judgments and not fear, reprisal or fear any kind of penalty. So that's the one part of it. So maybe you can respond.
Yeah,
there was another point that I lost, but it'll come back.
Yeah, no problem. And I think it would be difficult. So how do we filter? How do we deal with mistakes? Yeah, how do we, like, if we put together this board and we were, trying to get the best of the best, how do we even find them? How do we even filter them? And then how do we deal with, like, a mistake or errors? There's got to be accountability there too. And do you think the magic bullet really is independent, like independent oversight? Watch a lot closer to these groups?
And more audits, and then the incentives too. So again, from psychology, behavior is driven by punishment and rewards, right? Rewards and punishment, whether you're talking about raising children or even corporate incentives for how to motivate employees to do better work, right? You can either use rewards or punishments or a combination of both. And so to me, the accountability part, whether it's this independent panel, independent body, or the elected officials themselves, there needs to be more rewards. First of all, there needs to be more rewards for competent decision making, But then, of course, there needs to be more punishments or any kind of punishment for incorrect or flawed public policy decisions. And I know this sounds pie in the sky, but part of our bulletproofing ideas of trying to brainstorm is to provide stronger rewards and stronger punishments for elected official decision making. And of course, you have to grant, okay, it can be very difficult, and maybe it's an emergency, but if the people in charge are deciding whether it's an emergency or not, there's already a conflict, right? And even if there is a real emergency, that doesn't mean you just throw out democracy and accountability processes out the window, right? And so yes, you have to give benefit of the doubt early on to some extent, but again, if you have these better processes that are bulletproofed and provide better incentives to do your best job and to pursue the interests of the people beyond anything else, even your own ego, your own career interests, that's really what's needed. The second point, and maybe the final, is going back to, you keep alluding to an inquiry, like a broader inquiry, because the Emergencies Act inquiry, as you can see from my diagram, it's only one of the 17 major developments. And that was always my question. When is the broader public inquiry into the COVID measures more generally? When is that coming, right?
Next election. After the next election.
Based on what? Or like
it will be after the next election. There's no way that this parliament will do that inquiry.
Right, but is this a hope or something you've heard of?
It's the only option we have. It's the first opportunity we're going to have to do that. So we're going to need people in there.
That?
We declare it. No, you got to pursue it. So if you're an MP, you can pursue it. You can pursue the inquiry.
And even just if it's one MP?
Yeah, one MP. I in front of it would do it. Independent would do it.
Right. So because that's crucial, right? And that's kind of one of the downsides. I mean, I think they were forced to have an inquiry into the Emergencies Act because
this one, it was built into the statute.
The Inquiry Act.
Yeah.
And now I think Conservative MP Lewis is calling for a separate inquiry into the COVID vaccine, specifically COVID vaccine safety, though that seems a bit late to the party. But again, to me, we should be having this broader inquiry, right? And because the problem is, to just a casual onlooker, they could say, well, no, look, democracy is working fine. Look, they have an inquiry and they're going to conclude, the judge is going to give his decision and democracy is working fine, right? But of course, the Emergencies Act is only one small slice of all these other decisions that are arguably unjustified, right? But yeah, 2025, that's really, really, really far away. So maybe quickly, I was interested, like, how did you come to that decision to pursue that strategy compared to other strategies, given that it's, so long from now?
Well, that's the long-term strategy. So that is one that will give us 4 years or 5 years of efforts inside the House. All the other strategies also are valid, lawsuits, social media, pushing from the ground, protest, reaching out to the MPs, lawyers, doctors, political pressure. All of those are also valid. And I think we should never stop any of the different fronts. Use every front you have as long as it's legal and peaceful, but use them all. But the long-term one is, we're going to have a lot more impact if we have a key to the back door of the parliament and an office on the inside and a seat in the House. That's by far going to have the biggest impact.
But right now there are independent. I mean, not many.
No, there's 2 independents that are falling out of the party. Those are not true independents. So there's a very big difference in my mind between someone who received the label of independent because of a party fallout versus someone who went in as an independent. There was the platform from the beginning and have always been independent. It's very, very different. We don't put in independents. It's very rare. But the 2 that we have right now, one from Spadina, he fell out from the Liberal Party. Some corruption around him, some bad things around him. The Liberal Party tossed him out. He's trying to get back in. And then the other one, which is in Quebec now, recent, he decided to leave the party. So when Pierre won, he decided to leave. Those I don't consider those true independents by the function in the political party or political system, because they are just falling out. They're like fallen angels from the party.
But even if they're true independents, their role is still quite limited in terms of voting, right? Because their vote basically doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. I disagree with you there, Etienne, and I'm going to push back hard on that one. If you're looking at just straight up votes of being one of 338, oh, sure. Okay. If you just want to look at straight up numbers, one vote out of 338, it seems meaningless.
Right.
But that's not the only function of an independent. Calling them out, standing in question period and being very vocal, going to their doors, knocking on them, meeting with them, working with them to find out ways to bridge some of the problems that they're having, being the referee on the ice, blowing the whistle loudly, having MP powers for investigation and being able to get access to documents and stuff that is not public, being able to establish committees, even privy committees, where we have to sit down and go through private information. All of that becomes available immediately as tools to an independent, well, any MP. Those are all tools of an MP. But what allows the independent to take it a step further is basically MPs have to get permission from their party to do anything like that. Any rogue MP who goes out and starts to establish some sort of initiative on their own, it happens, but they get quashed pretty quickly, because unless they have party support, they're considered rogue and maverick. And that is not part of how parties manage their MPs. And that's exactly why they have whips. And that's why they always utilize whips, is because anytime you have a MP go slightly rogue, it looks like the party is not unified. It looks bad against the party, and they start looking at national optics versus the individual regional issue that MP might be bringing forward. So, for example, our MP, he's a nice guy. He's a really nice guy. I've met him. I've talked to him. He's a really nice guy. But let me just give you an example. We want the oil to flow. Okay, this is Alberta. We want the oil to flow. We get the oil flowing properly, and jobs are great for Yellowhead. So Yellowhead really would like to see pipeline, XL, a whole bunch of things being brought forward and being worked on and fought for. He can't. Even if everybody in Yellowhead said to him, hey, let's go push this issue forward. It's not a national issue that's supported. There's no support anywhere else other than Alberta for it. Therefore, the Conservative Party national mandate and platform doesn't have room for it. And what's he going to do? Get together with a few other conservatives and push hard? He can't. And that's where the independent is not restrained. We're not restrained in that fashion.
Right, but how confident can you be that you'll be treated seriously? So how do you really? So you mentioned about like initiating a public inquiry, sure. But like, what are the odds that they actually would treat you seriously? Because even with Randy Hillier, we saw in Ontario, and yeah, he's not a true independent because he also came out of Conservative, but he would be mocked. Like he would stand up. I
don't care about that though, Etienne.
He would say no, but it still shows you that like to the normies. Like they just treated Randy Hillier like he's a UFO for talking about quarantine camps, and it's almost like they're treating him as subhuman. And so I'd be afraid that if you, in the unlikely event you are elected to be a true independent, I'd be concerned that you would not be treated seriously, and you would have more power, as you're correctly pointing out. But it still might be insufficient.
Well, then what's your alternative? Just let another blue backbencher take over?
No, it's just about debating.
Well, that's my point, right?
Yeah, what are the costs and benefits of these different approaches, and try to hash out which ones, because it's an incredible amount, and you deserve a lot of praise. It's an incredible amount of effort to dedicate yourself. Like, okay, this is 3 years. I don't know when you started. So you deserve a lot of praise, but you know what I mean? In terms of costs and benefits, it's always the question of, are we really maximizing the value of our efforts in terms of probabilities of having impact? And yeah, I still think the probabilities of me having an impact is tiny, but
I disagree. I think there's ways you can.
But it's good to have these discussions just to try to think of other alternatives, right? Because that's the hard part, thinking of outside the box. Even if you're trying to think outside the box, sometimes you're still overlooking other strategies, and we're still thinking all the time, how can we pivot? How can we how can, like in business innovation, right? Like you always have to think, there's potentially ways to pivot to really try to maximize the chance that our efforts are going to have an impact. But I'm sure we'll continue these discussions.
Well, I'd like to kind of respond to that a little bit. I'm glad you brought up business and innovation, because you're absolutely right. That's kind of where we need to do the similar thing in politics. Good news for you. I'm an award-winning business innovator. I won some awards around that. You've got your PhDs and you've got your articles, but I'm an entrepreneur and award-winning. So my mindset has always been innovation. I was even part of the board of Ontario Innovation Center to approve all the grants and stuff like that for companies applying on innovation grants. So I agree with you completely. We got to map innovation into politics, because it's lacking. It's such an old traditional system that has no innovation in it either. Like open meetings, streaming everything. There's a whole bunch of things we can do. I disagree with you wholeheartedly that an independent path is kind of fruitless and pointless. I disagree completely, and I also think that
I didn't want to insinuate that it's completely useless. I was just expressing concerns.
Sure, but let me go ahead and respond to that. So Yellowhead specifically has a history of being a little bit more independent than most other ridings in Canada. Joe Clark came from Yellowhead. He was the one prime minister elected for a little while from the West. He's moved from the Conservative Party to independent, so he's fully independent now, because the Conservative Party is no longer the Conservative Party. It's moved too much to the left that kind of just left behind some independent people. And my particular riding is very, very impacted by basically everything you had on your chart, and they are not pleased with the response from the current MP. My riding will not vote in anybody else but a blue or an independent. They won't put anybody else in. So if they do want a voice that's a lot louder than the current one, I think there's only two paths. The first path is get behind an independent, whether it's me or someone else, and that will do it. The second path could be to convince the Conservative Party to drop whips, party platform, and adopt independent MPs, true independent MPs, so that the debates happen inside the party and it's not a platform. And if the party can learn how to truly do debates with independent MPs as part of the team, then I think we're going to be golden. I think we could do a lot more work by fixing the party itself to be more modern and more independent. I've written a letter to the CPC. I've even did it to the PPC and the Bloc to let them know that if you started to do independent MPs, Canada would get behind your party a lot stronger, because Canada's tired of whipped MPs. Now, whether they do it or not, like I sent it to them, I'm just a little guy. We'll see. But but if we don't start having MPs that actually have independent voices, whether they're party affiliated or otherwise, we're just going to have more of the same, which is exactly what you identified, is useless MPs. They can't do much. And that's a challenge to me, and I recognize that. And because I don't have an avenue where I have an MP that I think will do anything, I'm going to try and be it, because what else do I have?
And what about using business innovations to help your path?
Yeah, well,
we can talk about that next time. But
yeah, we can talk about that more about
the social psychology.
Yeah.
Like we need to use business innovation to awaken more people, because again,
well, the stream is back. So I just want to put that up.
Because until there's enough people that are awoken, they're not going to consider independence seriously enough. So I just had an idea of trying to use business innovations and social psychology techniques to try to awaken more people.
Well, maybe they need to see one. Maybe they need to see a true independent and what they can do. Maybe just an example of one is enough to wake Canada up. Maybe we only need a couple in this next election to show what it's for. But I agree with you. The parties have done a great job over 100 years convincing people that independents are a wasted vote. They've done a great job, because that's how they kept themselves. But yeah, let's try this again. Everybody, that was a wonderful chat. Here we are. The afternoon started. Etienne, we'll chat soon, okay?
The commission is reconvened. La commission reprend.
And if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.